Alright, welcome back to JLG Woodworking. Today we're going to be working on a live edge coffee bar. This is a very unique build. So there's a lot of different parts to this. Right now what I'm doing is I'm just getting the side pieces ready. They're going to be live edge walnut towards the inside, and I'm going to connect them with bow ties. In order to keep the dimensions the same, I'm just adding some cleats onto the side and tacking them in with the 18 gauge nailer so I can hold everything together, so that when I go ahead and I route for my bow ties, everything's going to be perfect. I'm going to check the square on that. I'm going to check my measurement. These aren't the final dimensions, so I'm not too worried. I just don't want anything to move after I've routed it, so I'm really careful with that. So if you remember in some of our other videos, I made a bow tie jig. This happens to be that exact bow tie jig. I got some double stick tape. I'm putting it on the back. It's really good stuff. And then I'm just going to take my bow tie jig and I'm going to go ahead and press it down. And I'm going to route it out. I'm using the plunge router. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking the meat out here. I'm going to cut my bow ties on the bandsaw. And when I do cut my bow ties on the bandsaw, I'm going to place those over it, and I'm going to go ahead and mark those out, and then I'll finish up with the chisels. So I've got 3 bow ties connecting both of these pieces. There's going to be a left and a right. Here I'm just taking some maple. I'm just cutting little pieces of stock, getting ready to go over to the bandsaw where I'll cut the actual bow ties. That's a bow tie that came out of the jig, so I'm just kind of marking the approximate length. I made them a little bit bigger. I cut them. I get 3 pieces. In actuality, it's going to be 6. I mark the center line, which is very important. Then you can see I go right over with my jig, my bandsaw sled, and I cut them all right up to the center line, flipping the pieces over. Now I have my bow ties. These bow ties are going to be slightly bigger than the meat I took out with the plunge router. And like I said, I'm going to finish these off by hand. So there I am. I'm marking it with a pencil. Trying to get really close. I sharpened my chisels right before I did it, even though I know it probably doesn't look like it. And I'm trying to take it right up to the line. Not taking too much at once. I don't really want to chip it out. So I'm taking little plunges and just trying to get as close to that line as possible. So I got the brown wood glue to go with the walnut. I mean, you can use regular wood glue. I don't see the difference. So now I'm fitting the bow ties in. I just get it started. Then I tap it in. Go ahead and take the block plane. I'm going to plane it down until I get close enough to where I'm not taking off any of the walnut, but I'm close enough to where I can finish it off with the sander. So I sand it flush. I don't want to gouge it. I want to hold the sander flat. There is one of the bow ties in. I sidetracked myself a little bit. I was putting a little black CA glue and activator, just filling some knots and some bug holes. Just because I had one that ran through the back of that other bow tie. Here I sped things up for you. You can see me. I put the final 2 bow ties in on this side. And then what I would do is I would repeat the process for the second side. These are going to make up the 2 sides of the hutch part of the coffee bar. So there I am, just filling away. I use the air compressor, blow some stuff out, I tap it in. That one I had a little trouble. I had to flip the piece over. But I did a little bit of planing, a little bit more CA glue. I used the scraper. I like the carbide scraper. I take the sander and I warm the CA glue up, and then it scrapes a lot easier. That's just one of the tricks I actually picked up from watching someone else. This is another component to the bar. I had already put the bow ties in this component. It's a piece of saplted maple. Now what I'm doing is I'm just flattening out one side, and then I would flip the piece over and flatten the other. I'm going to cut the edges to their dimensions. I'm using a track saw. In this particular instance, because I'm taking off so little, I can do it in one pass. But usually I do 2 or 3 passes. What I did on this particular top is I wanted to give it a little bit of a flare, so I set the saw to 22.5 degrees. I overhung the track by 1/4 inch, And I went ahead and I cut a big bevel. You can do that with a router, but there aren't as many router bits out there, and I didn't really have one that was going to make that same look. Now I'm going to fill some of the cracks on the top. For the maple, I'm using a combination of black and brown CA glue to kind of go with the spalting. There was some pretty big gnarly cracks. This is the bottom side right now that I'm working on. So I'm not really too concerned because it's going to be inside of a cabinet. But this was a pretty big crack and it went through and through. There's one of my new gadgets. I have I put a new vise on the end and I made my own bench dogs. I couldn't wait for the ones that I ordered from Amazon to come. So there I am. Like I said, a little bit of sanding, a little bit of scraping. So I sand, I warm it up, and then I take the scraper. If you don't have one of these scrapers and you're doing this, you should definitely look it up. I'll put the link to it in the descriptions. This is probably one of the best scrapers out there. Here you go, I'm blowing it out. So this crack was pretty deep. There I have a dry spot now, so I'm just taking some clear CA glue. I saw there was a lot of bug damage and whatnot. The wood was a little softer, so I wanted to harden the wood up. So I went ahead and did that. And then I just scraped it a little bit and I sanded it. I didn't have to go too crazy. Again, this is the back side. It won't take the finishes nicely. So once I've got that, now I'm working on the edges. I used 120 grit sandpaper and I had 120 grit sandpaper in the linear sander. So it's really just a lot of sanding. Just, the Randed Orbit sander on the bigger, flatter surfaces. And I like to use that linear sander. It's easier to control. So that in between coats I water pop. So you can see I water popped right there. Between the 180 and the 120, I like to go ahead and put any route radius. You can see there's a little bit of line that the router leaves. So now when I come back with the 180, I can go ahead and hand sand that out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sand all the rest of my pieces. I have the two sides. I have the base done. And here I'm just sanding. I water pop again, like I said. For this particular job, I was doing 80 grit, 120 grit, and 180 grit. Now I'm cutting these pieces to their final dimensions. I left the cleats on just to make it a little easier. I cut right through those. So nice and easy. I know it looks like the saw is struggling, but it's not. I used my crosscut sled to cut these to the final dimension. Basically just cutting the cleat off. These were pretty close to begin with. So I just do it nice and slow, a nice straight cut. I go ahead, I got my other mark, same thing, cutting it off. I like to set the saw blade just one full tooth above what I'm cutting. I get a cleaner cut, less tear out. Now I'm sanding the edges again with that linear sander, that pestle sander. It's one of their best in my opinion. I still had some saw marks, so I went ahead and I grabbed my number 5 plane. I planed some of the saw marks out. And now I'm just running my block plane on the edges to create a little bit of a radius. Once I do that, I'll come back with some sandpaper. I'll go ahead and sand any little inconsistencies out. And this way everything will be nice and smooth. We don't want any hard edges that anyone can cut themselves or you can get tear out or break. I checked it with the square. Everything was fine. A little final sanding right there. This was kind of a pain in the neck. I wish I had sanded more on the live edge pieces before I connected it, but I was able to get it done. If I had to do it over again, I would do it that way. Now what I'm doing is I have the top, the bottom, and the two sides. I'm just getting it set up where everything is where I want it, so I'll be able to mark it because I'm going to connect this with dominoes. That's the joinery I'm going to be using. So this is really just a temporary mock-up. I'm checking it with my woodpecker square. These squares are really good. They're really accurate. I believe this set was a one-time tool. So I don't know if you can get it again, but I was lucky enough to jump on it when I had it. But, just giving everything a little nudge, lining everything up. Once I make the marks with the domino, everything's going to go right back to where I want it to be. So now that I got everything square, I'm just going around with my pencil and making my domino marks. figure out how many dominoes I'm going to use, what size. If you don't have the domino joiner, it's probably one of the best tools I've purchased in the last 5 years. On my particular domino joiner, which you can see there, it has the woodpecker's fence. The woodpecker's fence was also, I think it was a one-time tool. You can now actually just get it regular. It has spacers, all different sizes, so you can get your setbacks correctly. Right here I'm marking out for the middle shelf. This is going to be the top part of a hutch that's going to have a coffee machine sitting on the main shelf. So I had to make sure that I had enough room for the coffee machine and also for the lid to flip open so that they'd be able to change the coffee filter, put new coffee in without fumbling around or having to slide the machine out. Once I've got that position marked where I know it's safe for the coffee machine, I'm going to go ahead and mark the line where I want the bottom of my shelf to be so that when I go ahead and put the dominoes in, I can line it up. I'm going to break everything down now that I got it marked. And what I do now, put the pieces aside, get the domino, and just start going to town. There wasn't too many dominoes. There was a few crazy angles. You can see there I clamped the block on just to keep myself from like tilting, so I can get the dominoes straight in, up and down. It was fairly easy. Now I'm just tapping the dominoes in, and what I'm going to do is once I get all the dominoes cut and I get all the dominoes in, I'm going to dry fit everything with the dominoes again. I like to do that just to make sure everything is exactly where I want it. I had to change back to the regular fence that comes with the domino in order to make this cut, but every once in a while you have to use the tools you're given with. So here I am. Here's my helper Kenny. He's usually behind the camera. We're going to go ahead and mop this up. It actually went together pretty easy. Get a couple of clamps on it. We got the middle shelf in. We're just going to top the top on. Get a few clamps. Persuade it into place. Everything's looking good. Check it with the square. I think I gave Kenny a high five there. We were moving pretty fast. But there it is. That's the end of part one. In the second part, we'll be making the chest of drawers that goes underneath. If you like what you see, please hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you.